know as soon as.
Ah.
Okay, so we are live.
Yep.
Hello, friends. I am Haimanti Bagchi, project lead of Story Project 10 by www.tellmeastory.biz. Welcome you to the second episode of the Devi series, and I'm privileged to have with us Richa Lakhera and Mona Verma this evening, and we are going to discuss Vinasha, the destruction and reconstruction. Kiran Munral ma'am could not be here as she's unwell and we wish her speedy recovery. This panel discussion is going to happen on the role of women in contemporary and historical narratives. The topic of destruction comes from concept of impermanence of life, an endless cycle of yin and yang energies. One always gives rise to the other, and each one there is the other. In daily life, our bodies keep shedding and regenerating cells all the time, but more consciously, we keep building and rebuilding our lives, relationships, and interactions periodically. Every changes, Everything changes. Some things pass, other things over a period of time, invasions of and periods of sadness are inevitable. People come and go, and the landscape of life undergoes many changes. But what stands out as a concurrent theme of life is Vinasha, the destruction and reconstruction. How have women contributed to this process in the historical and contemporary society? We'll know that, but before that, let me introduce the panelists this evening. Richa Lakhera is a TV journalist, an author, and a screenwriter. Her new novel, Contamination, is a supernatural adventure. Her best selling crime thrillers include Hungry Gods, Item Girl, and Satire Garbage Beat, and the forthcoming History of Violence, a political thriller. Several of Richa's books have been picked up for book to screen adaptation and are available on Audible. Richa is an award-winning TV journalist, and has worked as deputy editor and correspondent at NDTV for over a decade. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, hello. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. So our next panelist is Mona Verma, who is an award-winning author of 8 books and over a dozen anthologies, which are subject of theses for many research scholars and the ICSE ELT series. She has edited various science journals, self-help books, and biographies. She specializes as a haiku, limericks, and tanka poet. Listed as one of the 50 iconic authors 2022, she's a Paul Harris Fellow, Chief Coordinator of FLO FICCI UK Literature Committee, and member of Asia Development Bank. She co-owns Disha, which trains in MNCs, PSUs, and universities for EPT, FTP, PEP, and PSI and OB programs in India and abroad. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Haimanti, for having me here. Thank you, Coral, and lovely meeting up with Richa here.
It's such a pleasure to have you
Likewise.
both here with us today. And my first question to both of you is that because both of you have released your books recently, I humbly invite you to introduce your books to the viewers before I probe further. It will be nice if you specifically include women's characters in your introduction and tell us their relevance in the storyline.
So who goes first, Mona, or should I?
Yeah, you can go first.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, see, my book is Contamination. It is a supernatural combat, as you said rightly. It's a fantasy adventure. And just to begin with, I think storytellers have, for the longest time, been very interested in writing about the good versus evil kind of battle between the hero and the nemesis. And even as children, if you remember, like we've always been interested in the Amar Chitra Katha kind of books, where the Veer used to be there versus the Danav or the Asura, the Rakshas or the Daitya, or what you may call it. Both the parties could have any avatar. Both parties had this, huge armory of marvelous astras, and some of them could take any form. Some were cursed, some had gifts, some had bad karma, some were in their nth janam, All are very relatable because they showed the kind of vulnerability, and that's why it kind of struck a chord with all of us. And also, they had very interesting mentors who could, be from any place. They could be animals, they could be from the dark world, they could be ghosts. And later in teens, we were introduced to the Marvel universe, and now too. So there's this one classic heroes template, which is this good versus evil, and hero goes out adventure pe crisis hota hai, battle, and returns back victorious. And I was very interested in this mashup of Prateen, as in the ancient and the contemporary. And I find the space very exciting. So my book, Contamination, here it is. I love this cover. It is in the realm of this supernatural powers, but in a contemporary setting. So mythological creatures are there. There are dark forces, and they have these phantasmic astras or weapons. And the setting is modern, and it fits modern evil against ancient powers, very much like mythologist Campbell, Joseph Campbell's monomyth, where the skeleton for which has been the skeleton for many good versus evil stories. So our hero, who's Amba. Amba is the main protagonist, and her journey follows this classic hero's template. You know, like call she has these initial she has this very faces severe trauma when she's a child, and then from there she has ordeals and struggles, and then forming of allies and making enemies, and then the supernatural aid which comes, and of course waging battle, crossing the threshold, and towards the final resolution. So I think my hero, who's Amba, she is all about surviving this trauma. If I may just make it more contemporary, like for instance in Harry Potter, she's an orphan. She survives this trauma, watches her parents getting killed. Then, like in Lord of the Rings, you have Frodo, or in Matrix, you have Neo, or in Lion King, you have Simba. So you have all these heroes who face trauma and ordeals and struggle, and then there's of course the final resolution. So Amma is also forced to undertake a journey, and face great odds, which kind of transform her externally and internally. So the whole overriding theme of this book, Contamination, is choosing light over darkness. It is also about the transformative power of forgiveness, and and also the fact that there's a lot of genuine emotions. I have most of my characters. You'll meet them in a very normal and relatable world. So, because I think fantasy, even for fantasy like this to work, it must be kind of rooted in very authentic emotions. So that is a bit about Amba. I can actually go on and on, but I'll just wait for your next question.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Mona, ma'am?
Yes, thank you. I so agree with whatever Richa has said, and I think I'm going to echo the same understanding of mythology and storytelling. Our country, our Bharatvarsha, has one common thread uniting its entire diversity. That is stories and the love for storytelling. So stories have been told for as long as we all have had language. So when it comes to mythology, storytelling is perhaps a very, very powerful way that human beings understand their cultural bearings. Now, we all have a memory of an elder telling us stories, regaling us from various incidents of the Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Panchtantra, and whatnot, which form the social backcloth of our society, and also shape the way we understand the world and our history. But I have one point there. Everything was very one-sided. Those stories were very raw, very absorbing, very moving, but they were one-sided stories. And generally I would ask my grandmother, why did he do so, why couldn't he do this, to which she would always say, wo bhagwan the, jyada sawal nahi पूछते, right? So those whys were not answered, they were never answered. So through this book, the Deve Sutras, the book that I just released on the 21st of August, which has 24 stories from the 18 Mahapuranas, I have tried answering those whys. So when as kids we were hearing the stories but we were not believing the stories. This is what I feel. Now, when my publisher came up with the idea that Mona, let's work around the Mahapuranas, I was very skeptical. I told him that, the Mahapuranas is like a treasure trove and these are smritis. So we may not have as much of written document supporting, for our research. So how can we understand that this is something which is preposterous, or this could be, given a hard pass, and this is something which is relevant and which is right? So he said, do your research. In case you're not able to come up with something very interesting or something not very convincing, we will drop this idea and we will start working on something else. So we had a backup plan also when we were working on this book, the Mahapuranas. But when I started reading the Mahapuranas, I realized, because I did this research with my daughter who was home for 2 years during the lockdown. So I found that the Puranas have very fascinating tales, the tales of the Trinity, the valor of the warriors, the ethereal beauty of the nymphs, the goddesses, the love, tales of longing, the penance of the sages, and whatnot. And at that point, I realized that anything which is ancient, it's not necessary that it's obsolete as well. संस्कृति प्राचीन है लेकिन जर्जर नहीं है. So I had to read well, I had to research very well, and then to be able to write well, to be able to show well at the end of the day. So when we were writing these stories, we tried addressing all the emotions that we guys have in our normal lives, in the contemporary setup. So what is it that we feel today? We feel fear, we feel envy, we feel love, we feel trauma, we feel all those things. So now there are those 9 rasas also. The rasas are those, the rasas that we feel are the shringar, the bhai, the saundarya, the viras, abdut, bhayanak, vibhas, karuna, rodra, all those things. So these are normal emotions which are there in the Mahapuranas, and these are also the emotions that we people feel. Now, that's how I realized that the Puranas have an enchanting story for almost everyone. So when I wrote this book in a way that it could entice a 10-year-old and also attract a person who can still read. So whether they are 90 or 99. So I wrote about very strong female characters over there. So female characters are Sita. There's Ashok Sundari. There is a Radha Rani. There is a Damayanti. There are so many strong characters. See, for example, if you look at Gandhari, I mean, she was a living epitome of what cannot be cured must be endured. How much strength does that take for a person to realize and come to that stance? There is Shakuni's wife, Arshi, who had a huge foresight and was a very wise woman. There was Kunti, who was very mature and yet very mysterious. There was a Satyavati, who was a master of realpolitik. So I tried writing about all these female characters to make my book come across as relevant for today's time, and also bust the stereotypes that whatever the kind of characters or the protagonists we had in old stories were VP victims.
Mona ma'am, my next question is to you.
Yes.
When we talk about mythology, as you were saying, that there are so many immortal tales and lores, and these are full of knowledge. With an enormous number of tales in our mythology, how did you decide upon these 24 kathas? What was the basis of your selection for the Devya Sutras?
Haimanti, that was a very tough call. Right. It is like a treasure trove. The Puranas, the 18 Mahapuranas were like a treasure trove. And well, I will say some stories were rather preposterous. So I thought, in case I take up every story which seems attractive but rather preposterous and will not gel with today's children or the readers who have a completely different brain mapping, the entire reason for writing these stories will be defeated. So
Mhm.
I made, both me and my daughter, we made some bullet points. What are the things we are not going to include in the stories? So when we had that kind of an Excel sheet where we were ticking off things that we did not want, we were actually left with barely 100 stories to choose from. Now, from these 100 stories, we passed it through a tougher and a more strict filter as to what are the kind of stories we would enjoy reading. So, my filters were, the first filter was, I did not want to talk about religion at all, because the moment a story it has religion, or starts talking about deities and whatnot, it gets very didactic and very preachy. So
Mhm.
the second thing, and it came from the observation that children generally, sorry, my people generally say that children these days don't read. It's not as if children don't read. Children don't read stuff that is didactic and preachy. anything that is preposterous, or which is like overhead transmission. Children like to read things which interest them. So as a modern writer, I have to choose stories, interesting stories, to get a reader interested in my work. Look at, like, Richa just said, people are reading Harry Potter. Children are reading Harry Potter. There are miles long queues. I've seen, witness them in London when the new Harry Potter book was on the anvil of release. So people would, queue up at about 2 a.m. in the morning, so that when the store opens at 10, they can grab their copy. So it's not as if
Yeah.
people are not reading, they are reading, but we need to dish out interesting stuff. Second filter was that I wanted very interesting backstories, so that answer my whys. Like I said, that I would ask my grandmother why, and she would never answer my why. To her, it was either a god or a devil. So for my reader, now I'm hefting a huge responsibility on my shoulder, that I need to answer the whys. So how do I answer the whys when I have a very interesting backstory to support the reason why a person did what they did? Third filter was I wanted to bust the stereotypes. I wanted to talk about gender fluidity. So I spoke about Shikhandi, I spoke about Ela and Shuddhaman, I spoke about, gods. Gods were people who were very humanized, but they had special powers. So I spoke about Narad and his envy and his jealousy. I spoke about a Brahmin called Narottam who believed in the caste system, but what did Vishnu do to him? Vishnu overrid his being a Brahmin with with a label for good conscience and character. So anyone who had a good conscience and character, and even if it was a Shudra, Vishnu was for that person. Vishnu was on that side. So I was trying to bust those stereotypes as well. Secondly, another filter was that in spite of so much of research that went into it, I did not want to sound researched. So if anything had too much of narrative, I did not go for that. And then there were challenges also. There were lots of challenges in choosing the stories. There were stories which had clear dichotomies. For example, at one point when Sage Jamini goes to Markandeya Rishi and says that I have so many questions about the Mahabharata, and please answer those questions. So so Markandeya Rishi tells him, you go to the Vidyanchal and you will find four birds who will give you the answers to your questions. Now, the names of these four birds, Haimanti, were different across the different scriptures that I read. Somebody said they were Pingishka, the other one said Supatra, Vibodha, Sumukha, but another, the fourth name was different. So, unless and until I came across a majority where I could agree on a certain stance, I did not go for those things, because if I myself am confused, what kind of story am I telling to the young people out there? I was not deviating from the mainstay of the stories. I was trying to tell them in an interesting manner, but not deviate from the mainstay. And at any point, if I felt that I'm deviating from what the original story is, I would leave it and go for something that I was more confirmed about and more convinced about. Because I do not want to just simply appease my reader. I want to convince them as well. Hence, these 24 stories only.
That's amazing. I think that is the most interesting part, that you had actually made an Excel sheet while selecting the kathas.
Yeah.
Richa ma'am, my next question for you. Your book Contamination is a thriller, leading to the triumph of good over evil, as you were telling. There is a constant theme of destruction and reconstruction. How do you see the character of Amba as the one who recreates her path in the face of struggle?
Yeah, sure. Though just taking on from what Mona just said, I don't draw an Excel sheet, but you should see the kind of charts I draw. It does happen because you end up, and the chart is everything, and that is the with arrows and circles and everything. You need to have that chart, and it needs to sort of a constant reminder, where character arc kis taraf ja raha hai. So that is the most important thing. So yeah, I mean, as to your question, see, Amba is a very reluctant hero at first. She's different. she's different. She knows she's different from other people. She has very disturbing dreams all every night, and her powers are sort of different. She has no answers why she's like that. She wants to be ordinary because she doesn't want to be, that's what actually she craves for, to be like other people. But she has no answers again, as I said, why she is the way she is. And she has always tried to keep her powers hidden, and but slowly they are being masked, as she can't separate a normal life from high stakes of being a true self. So, but we, as I said, meet her in very normal settings. Events happen which kind of force her to choose. When she comes in the crosshairs of a very evil guy, who's I think one of the most evil characters I've written about. He's a colonel. He's a psychopathic kind of a character. His name is Rosie Madbull, and he has it in for her. I mean, he just wants to completely destroy her because his ego is hurt and everything. So tests and struggle, allies, enemies, ordeals, battles, rewards, resurrection, resolution, everything awaits Amba. So, and she's armed with, initially, she's just reluctant, but slowly she gets it. She has the right mentors, and mentors, as I said, are very, very important. They point us to the right direction. And of course, sometimes not also. So armed with her supernatural nature, super nature, and this word. So when I was writing this book, and actually I wrote this book during the pandemic. In fact, I remember I was writing a political thriller, and suddenly when the pandemic happened at that time, and it kind of, I just didn't want to write that book anymore. And I had written, I remember, like 80,000 words. I just stopped because I think all of us were gripped with a sense of mortality, and it was like, I started thinking of something else, a world unseen, and the super nature. So I sort of work, kind of it led to this kind of a topic. In any case, I'm more interested in writing thrillers and stuff. So contamination started just from, in the middle of the pandemic. And I was not even actually writing this book. I was writing history of violence. But I just stopped writing that after 80,000 words and started writing this book. And in any case, yes, as I said, she's embroiled in this whole good versus evil battle. It doesn't start like that. Initially, it starts because she just has to look out for herself. And I actually did not really, when I wrote this book, I was not trying to break any stereotypes or anything. I was just like, what kind of book I'd like to read, you see. And as I said, it is related and relatable emotions and stuff. But I must talk about my villain, my evil guy here, who is, because as they say, any saga of good versus bad is only as good as the villain. Of course, we have the hero. Hero has to be good. He has to be heroic, or she has to be heroic. वो बेचारे के पास क्या कर सकता है? Villain, जो आपका evil character है, वो क्या क्या करता है? For me, that's very important. In my last book also, I remember, oh my God, sort of time I gave Ranganathan, Dr. Ranganathan, he was the evil guy in this. And, I think sometimes, I become even more closer to the evil guy because you really have to go into his head. You have to understand what that mind is. And this chap, and his name is Rosie Madbull. So people actually found that also quite intriguing, that, you have a name for an evil character. Okay, he's a colonel, he's a psychopath, he's in charge of a jail, he has his own private army, uska aapne naam Rosie rakha hai. But why his father called him Rosie? Because when he, there's a story behind it. And I somehow, and his acts, what he does, his daily brutality, he's grotesque. And he has a twisted moral code. So when I started writing about, actually more than Amba, when I started writing about Rosie Madbull, he was like, it was like going into this dark room, and and really not knowing what will happen next. So he's in charge of this prison. It is a penal cesspool where the worst of criminals are there, and he has his way with them. He makes a private army, and uske crosshairs mein Amba is there. Amba flees from his jail, and his army of criminals is after her and everything. And during that journey, that when she flees, after that, she slowly starts realizing, because she has no other option. You see, she has to. She wants to survive, and sometimes the need to survive, pushes you, and then you start kind of accepting your nature, your super nature. I think all of us are endowed with that super nature, which most of us probably, because I think we have read in science that most of the time we only live, I think, to 5 or 3% of our brain capacity, but all of us are endowed with something which is much more. And so she sort of starts has these ordeals and everything, and she starts meets mentors who are from the supernatural world, and then she fulfills a few prophecies. And so what I'm saying is that contamination basically is a departure from the divorced from reality kind of fantasy books we read, because sometimes I feel fantasy books sometimes can be very divorced from reality. And I wanted to write a kind of book which even maybe my daughter would, or kids of this, they would want to read, because they can relate to these settings. They can relate to what the guy or what your hero is doing. And the scenes cannot strain credibility. They need to be constructed on very stronger scaffolding. So all that was actually a greater concern for me. And I think at the end of the day, even contamination, like any book, is basically a look at the human condition. Whether it is we are talking about nature, supernature, human, inhuman, whatever, we are all looking at the human condition. And it's about so this book is also about our individual gifts. It's a process of becoming of Amba. It's the process of becoming of a hero. We are not born heroes. We choose. So it's the process, what she chooses in life. So I wanted this book to kind of feel personal. It felt personal to me when I wrote it. I don't know how much it will resonate with people, but I've tried my best here. So she has this call, an event happens, a series of events happen in her life which are very traumatic, and actually that pushes her whole equilibrium is disturbed, and so action is obviously necessitated. And then if she had refused that call, initial call, we all get that little call, then her experience, I guess, would not have been of a hero. Then it would have been of a victim. But then she's the hero, I guess. So, I mean, there needs to be reconfiguration, there needs to be realignment within her, reconstruction. So, I think a hero is not born, it's all the becoming of the hero. And this is what this book is also about. So, lots of her, unresolved issues inside her come out. And the plot, I kind of made it in a way which kind of provoked her to make choices, and choices which will reveal her integrity. So that, initially, even though she's a reluctant hero, but then the motivate to act becomes higher than her fear. So that was the basic idea. And and she, in the end, of course, faces the biggest fear, because I feel at the end of the day, evil is always possible, it's very easy, but good is very difficult. And of course, one more bigger message of this book is the power of forgiveness. How at the end of the day is the biggest power of all.
Great. This
Yes.
is really intriguing to get a storyline of it. And the
Hmm.
most empowering part is that whenever you call Amba the hero, so that is
Ah.
something I loved.
Yes,
So
because heroism is gender agnostic. I mean, a hero is gender agnostic, na? I
yeah,
mean, you needn't
yeah,
be a male or a female
great,
or
great.
a gender fluid or anything. Your choices make you a hero, I guess. And it's always a
Yeah,
process of becoming.
yeah, of course. So my next question is again to both of you. It is said that there are never really endings. Things keep going on, they overlap and blur, and again resurface. Basically, what we know as cycle of life. So, do you see this statement true for
Right.
your narratives? Can we go with
Sure.
Mona, ma'am?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you come again, please? Because I think I just lost the
Okay. Yeah.
screen
Sure.
for some time.
Okay. So basically my question was that everything is changing, and the cycle of life is such that it blurs and things again resurface. So how true this statement is for your narrative?
Okay. Yes. I think in both in mythology or even in a real life, everything is circular. I think Richa, being a journalist, will certainly agree with what I'm saying, that, one thing leads to another in our lives at any point. So my story could be part of somebody else's bigger story. Say, like in our management classes, we talk about the domino effect. or scientists talk about the butterfly effect. So something happening in another part of the world is bound to have a very profound effect on the climate and on the sensibilities of people who are on the other end of the world. These things do happen all the time. And my favorite line is that life is linear, but karma is circular. So when it comes to stories, of course, one character is hugely linked to somebody else. Generations are linked to future generations. There is bound to be a predecessor, there's bound to be a successor out there, and there are bound to be backstories as well. So a story which started with somebody else may not end with the other generation. It just goes further and further and further down. For example, if I talk about a story called Sita, there's a story in my book called The Curse of Parrots. Now, if you talk about karma and say that karma is circular and life is linear, and you say, well, what bad karma did Sita have that she endured the kind of ordeal that she did in Ashokvatika when Ravan abducted her? If you go back, there's a backstory out there. The thing was that she was cursed by a pair of parrots because she tormented a female parrot and separated it from the male parrot who happened to be a husband. He cursed her that when you will be separated from your spouse. So that story was there. Now, that was a backstory. This story basically does not find any mention in the Ramayana per se, but this is a backstory. So, that particular incident in her childhood, when she was a very, very young girl, before she got married, and before even she realized that there was somebody called Ramchandra in Ayodhya, this is what happened. So, that backstory spilled over to her present and into her future. So, nothing really ended. Whatever happened, happened, and then it led to so many incidents in the future also. Now, she was talking about, Richa was talking about a protagonist called Amba. There is a mythological character also, Amba, who was reborn as Shikhandi. So when you see in the battle of Mahabharata between the Kuruputras and the Pandavas, it was Shikhandi who came and actually killed Bhishma Pitama. So why Shikhandi came? What kind of enmity did Shikhandi have? Shikhandi was a gender fluid person, half man, half woman. But what was the reason? Reason was something from the previous life when he was Amba, and she always blamed Bhishma for ruining her life. That is the reason that she had the boys Dhritarashtra and the brother, and that was a problem. That was that there was an albino, and then there was a blind person. Why? Because at one point she closed her eyes, and the other point she was shivering with fear. That is the reason. So both in terms of Pandu and Dhritarashtra, that was a backstory that there was. So every story is like a complex web. Everything has a reason. So, and that reason is what renders validity and relevance to how the story unfolds. So, if you will also see the Battle of Mahabharat, it was a battle. It was a battle of individual scars, individual backstories, individual intentions, and very personal words. Now, that was something else which was spilling onto the Battle of Mahabharata. So, what ended? Nothing ended with the problems people had. Finally, they went into war, and the war also had its consequences and repercussions. So, and even in today's time, if you see, when we were telling those stories, which were told thousands and thousands of years ago, the physical evidence of the stories are still there. So that particular incident in her childhood, when she was a very, very young girl, before she got married, and before even she realized that there was somebody called
Mona
Ramchandra
ma'am,
in
are you there?
Ayodhya, this is what happened.
Yeah.
So whosoever their children or whosoever wishes to hear. There is a temple of Somdev Mahadev in Gujarat where Chandradev made for Shiva. So when people go to that temple, the children ask their parents, "So why have we come to this temple? What is the story over there? What's the backstory?" That entire story is told and retold again with a slightly different flavor. So where do the stories end? They never end.
Absolutely.
That's true. That's true.
Richa ma'am?
Of course, as Mona said rightly, that this whole cycle of life and karma being a circle. Uh, for me, I am, of course, quite invested in that. I'm also, this whole concept of justice is also very integral to me. in many ways. I am very invested actually in the ending from the beginning, like all of us are when we write stories. We kind of have an idea where it should end. Because I think readers mostly they want justice to be restored in this whole circle. They want justice to be restored. I don't think readers care as much about a happy ending, but justice, yes. Because if there is no sense of justice, they don't have a sense of redemption. So, as I said, I mean, with this story, this kind, because I'm doing this kind of story writing for the first time. Before this, I've written thrillers, and before that, a satire and everything. For me, it was the first time I was writing fantasy, about a fantasy world, and I totally loved it. Even though I did feel the need to kind of restrain myself from constantly explaining what my characters, because I think that kind of flattens the storytelling. Um, so yeah, I mean, I was quite invested, as I said, in the ending. I was invested in the concept of justice, and there needs to be a visible sense of redemption. There needs to be visible justice. There needs to be my hero should ask for help. She should ask for help. There's no shame in that. So these were little things which were very important for me. My hero is frustrated. My hero asks for help. My hero kind of represents change. She's a champion of becoming. She's not become. So the whole process is the journey, which is more important for me, actually. In fact, the book also ends at a point where the line is, what will you do when we come? It ends with a question mark. I mean, it's a beginning of another story. So, but as Mona was saying before this, that, it's always, everything is there for a reason. Now, for instance, with Abba, there is a reason. Now, for instance, with Madbull, with Rosie Madbull, there is a reason why he is the way he is. So his father is killed by villagers, by his employees of his factory, and Madbull has seen that murder. He wants revenge, from these the indigenous people, and he wants them to suffer worse than what his father had suffered. So it basically probably took seed in his head at that time. And as I said, to walk into his head was like walking into a very dark room, and there's no light, and there are like thousands of keys, and you don't want to be there. But that's how he is. And so his meanness, I wanted his meanness to come across like an organ, real thing, because if he's a psychopath, and we know that most psychopaths and sadists enjoy other people's suffering. So he's like that. He thinks the rules don't apply to him, and all this is related to what has actually happened to him. He's a egotistical creep. He is grotesque. He's dangerous because he will remove anyone who gets in his way. Doesn't have feeling, causes a lot of damage, and he becomes absolutely insane when he is under scrutiny. So that is where I sort of kind of are the motivations which kind of drove this Rosie Madbull. About Amba, what kind of drove her was the trauma she had to undergo when she was a child. See, even when she was born under stars, or under stars which are supposed to be it was supposed to be evil. That's what the village shaman said. So the first thing, in fact, line which is uttered when she is born is that she should be dead. You see, so it starts from there. It's only because of a mother who's very ferocious, who kind of saves her life and everything. But how it turns out is how the people, because what is foretold when she's born is, because in a village, otherwise also people have a huge tendency to believe, in the patris and everything. So what is told about is that great evil will come through her. So that is why they want her dead. But she's saved by her mother, but they and the mother has to pay a price. Her family has to pay the ultimate price and everything. She sees that, goes through great trauma there, but she manages to save. From there also she comes out triumphant. Even though she's a child, she does a particular act which kind of establishes her heroism even when she's a child. She chooses to do something even at that stage. So for me, she started choosing very early, and all of us can actually start choosing early. I don't know, with her, that's how I started. So I have attempted to marry this kind of mythology, which I'm doing for the first. I don't know whether I can call it mythology in that sense, because I have these mythological characters, and this Amar Chitra Katha type of storytelling, but in a very contemporary setting. And so we have ancient beings here with their weapons and everything. So I've tried to infuse certain myths with very trendy sensibilities, and tried to make the plot accessible and contemporary. The story is kind of peppered with the reference to gods and demons, but as I said, uh, in our setting, in normal setting. Yes, it's much more than actually the story is much more than just a hero's venture from the world of normal into the supernatural. It is much more than that, and uh, then of course she does win that final decisive victory, which is of course to be expected in any fantasy book, to sort of kind of work out, about contamination, there are other catalysts also who drive Amba, and I'll talk about that later on. It's not just Rosie Magdala Ramba. There's certain, like her brother, her relation with her brother, her relation with a mentor, her relationship with her, so there are lots of other catalysts who kind of prove very, very crucial in her journey as the hero. Yeah.
Great. Um, so my next question is to Mona ma'am. Madhubani sketches. It's about the Madhubani sketches in your book, which are really intriguing and add a sort of regenerative touch on the note when we were talking about cycle of life. So these are, really thought-provoking sketches to go with the stories. What inspired you to use these beautiful sketches in Devya Sutras?
Honestly, Haimanti, it was basically by fluke. I had COVID, and during COVID, I was finding it very difficult to read. So I just thought, for ages I've been trying my charcoal sketches and whatnot. So I requested family, to put my charcoal sketches and my sketchbook outside my room. And somehow, I don't know how come, I just embarked on this new journey of doing Madhubanis. And I was like hugely interested in that field because they were coming out well, or maybe everybody encouraged me because I was suffering and they said bahut acha hai, bahut acha hai. So anyway, I made those. But it was only, once I just put something out on the social media that I have made these sketches, and my publisher happened to see them. And then he told me, Mona, when we were editing this book, the Deve Sutras, he said, do you realize what you've done? I said, what? So I thought it was something about the book and some bad editing or some such thing. So he said, no, no. You made those 4 sketches that you put out on the social media. What were they? I said, I think there was a snake, there was a fish, there was a bird. I don't even remember. I think a flower. So he said, Muna, all these have such a huge significance in Indian mythology. And then, on hindsight, I felt, oh, yeah, why not? And he said, why don't you put them in a book? Because it will lend a very unique flavor to the book. You are writing a book, and then also you making the illustrations yourself. Very few authors have done that in the past. So I had a snake over there, and the reason I had a snake over there that they are regarded as the earliest living beings. In Indian mythology, they symbolize power and strength. Adishesh is a king of Nagas and a devotee of Vishnu. It is also believed that planets are held on the hood of Shesh Naga, and he had the power to move and stop the Kal Chakra, the wheel of time. Lakshman and Balram, the younger brother of Lord Ram and the elder brother of Lord Krishna, are known to be human forms of Sheshnag. Lord Shiva wore Vasuki the snake around his neck, and Vasuki also helped the Devas in Samudra Manthan. In Mahabharata again, Arjuna's wife Ulupi is described as half maiden and half serpent. So snake. Now the flower. Every culture, if you know that whether it is celebration, whether it is death, whether it is a prayer, flowers hold a very special significance and position. They're a symbol of purity and a new life, hope, and whatnot. And even in Indian mythology, there are endless references to deities' love for them. For example, if you see Brahma is depicted as seated on a lotus, goddess Lakshmi is on a pink lotus, whereas your Saraswati is on a white lotus. Krishna's complexion was compared to Neel Kamal, right? He played under the Kadam tree, and Rukmani loved the Parijat flowers. Shiva is known to be a beast by the Bel Patras, and it is the Ashoka tree also that granted his wish for a daughter called Ashok Sundari. Then were fishes. If you look at fish, the Vishnu Purana begins with the story of the Matsya Avatar, the fish incarnation of Vishnu, right? In Mohenjo-daro, if you know, it is believed that a fish is the belief that fish as a mortal creature was most loved by the gods and formed one of the 8 constellations in their faith. And then come the birds, which are very popular in Indian mythology. Birds like parrots, Garuda, owl, swan. They play a very pivotal role in shaping the storyline. They symbolize wisdom, grace, prudence. In Hinduism, in fact, Vishnu mounts on Garuda. Parrots are known to master the scriptures like Shukadev, and ancestors were known to take the form of a crow to visit their descendants. Like we are just done with the Pitra Paksha,
Yeah.
and we offer food to crows. Why? The same reason as I just said. So, and also because when I made all these sketches, it also lent a very contemporary feel to the book. And as Richa just said, that we are writing the same stories for a children of this generation, for authors of just this generation, which has a completely different brain mapping and a very logical mind. They want to read the old stories, but they want them in a nice contemporary fold. So that is the reason I had the 4 sketches.
So these sketches were really beautiful. I got to see the sketches, and it really suits with the tales which you were talking about.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for that.
Thank you.
Richa ma'am, my next question is to you. In the realm of supernatural and horror, you were already talking about the brother sister relationships, and the layers and the strains, in especially the brother sister relationship. Sometimes relationships suffer due to power play between the
Oh,
genders.
yes.
So to what extent do your characters represent the power play?
Right. I'll come to that. But first, what Mona said was very exciting. In my
Yeah.
book, I forgot to mention it. I've done this lovely, fabulous map. It's my first fantasy map. All right. So basically, I think since I was doing a fantasy book for the first time, and I could do an Excel sheet, of course. I what I did was a map. So it gives an idea to the reader कि आपकी story किधर play कर रही है. Also gives me an idea, right? I keep so here you will see this whole. I don't know whether you can zoom in on this or something. I don't know where to put this. So here, this
It
is
is.
divided into different areas. Yeah. So there is a particular area here where she's born and Amba is born and she has she faces the biggest traumas and her parents are killed and all that. This is the Jotsama forest where she faces the Audi, the dark area. Actually, it's quite shaded. I was quite worried कि print पे आएगा कि नहीं ठीक. Sometimes colors always bleed and everything, but this has come out very nice. Underground पे there is the Colonel Macbull the jail which is there, where his private army is there, and here up where her mentor stays. So I kind of divided this like this is my first fantasy map. I've called it the map of hinterland of Hori and thereabouts. It was important for me to get it like this because I think in a fantasy book, people want to see कि कहाँ है character. I mean, you don't have real places. Where do you relate to? आपने बोल दिया जोत्समा forest किधर है? Where is your Bakir jail? Where is your Hori mountains? So if it gives you kind of an idea, this kind of this, that's why I drew it for myself also to get. So I had to get quite a bit of geography right. At the end of it, I said, oh my God, they were supposed to be here. How can she read this place? So I had to, it was very important for me to draw this
Yeah.
map because then it gave me an idea. अरे यार ये तो पहले यहाँ पे थी. How is she reaching here so soon? So we do all that as writers. So that was very important for me. I thought I must talk about my map. All right, talking about the brother sister relationship. We always have this kind of gender play. It doesn't happen only between men and women, also between women. There's always this strained relationship. Power play happens between all genders. You see, it needn't be a man woman thing, it is woman woman thing, it can be anything. So, what happens with her situation is like this. Her brother is Nakul. He's a good looking boy. He's born, and when he's born, he's born under stars which are not like which are accepted and everything, and he's a boy in any case, so he's really welcomed. His birth is celebrated and he's a beautiful boy, and and everything. His name is Nakul, and but slowly what happens is that he has Nakul grows up there. As I said, initially there is this trauma incident which happens where the parents are killed, and Nakul is inside with the parents, and it's Amba who, at a very young age, actually goes inside. She jumps into that fire with someone which no one really expects her to do that. They are thinking the whole family has been killed, but she's been out into the forest and everything. She saves her brother. And after that, of course, the tale of Amba starts when she chooses to do that. But problem is that Nakul, from that moment, becomes the boy who was saved by his sister. And by so there, he always feels that he kind of supports the villagers against his own sister. He feels that kind of his sister is the weird one, and he feels taunted. He feels being made fun of as a weakling because his sister is very kind of a strong girl. So he's unable to love and cohabit because he's got that ingrained non-resolution of his issues. He has unable to form issues. He feels he's a loser. He tries to join the army. And he's unable to really face bullies. It's his sister who saves him every time because she is, as we said, she's different. That's established in the beginning itself. And he doesn't like the fact that everyone calls him that. Thinks of him as a loser, thinks of him as a coward, and yes, there are relations there. So he's resentful, he's angry, he's unresolved, and I wanted the audience to be concerned about him also. Empathize with him, make him look also vulnerable because he feels like that. There is a reason why he feels like that. I guess that is, I tried to kind of poke his vulnerability in certain places, in certain places in the plot where he gets hurt and everything. So that is about him. But he's not the only person who's a catalyst in her journey. There is a lot of power play between her and her mentor, her and her. The commander of a force. He's also there, and similarly, there's a lot of other catalysts, as I said, who are responsible for her journey. For instance, Nathan Ray is a positive influence. He is the kind of he invokes. He's a kind of moral compass actually to the story, and he invokes the lens. It's his job to invoke the lens on the inherent corruptions and instabilities in that area where she is. So, but he kind of proves a very key catalyst in her growth. So their power play is different. It is more complementary. Then Amba is, of course, and he rescues her from a life-threatening situation. So there's a relationship there. Then there is another relationship she has with the mentor. Her name is, she's a Mahashramanka. Her name is Patala. So she has very dark powers, and but she is not just because she has powers which cannot be explained doesn't mean that she's evil or anything. She is a mentor, and she kind of reveals to Amba her own strength and what Amba was initially considering, are contaminants within her. She thinks that she refuses to accept her own powers, which she feel are essentially not of her world. They're parasites, but it's Patala who kind of acts as a guardian and introduces her to her real powers. So that there is a lot of power play here because initially she is very reluctant. She doesn't want to be like Patala, who's supposed to be a witch by everyone. She's a normal girl. She doesn't want to be in that. To be categorized like that, she in fact she tells her many times. She says, "I'm not a witch. Why are you telling me these things?" And when Patala tries to tell her that being a witch is not a choice, it's a gift you've been given. And a witch, then she explains to her the meaning of what people think is a witch and what actually it can mean. And she introduces her to her super nature. So there's a lot of power play there initially. So you have a mentor and a very reluctant kind of a student, and then a kind of power play there. Then, of course, Amba is assailed by her doubts and reservations and struggles. She wants to find her answers and everything. So there is the whole kind of gamut of emotions she sort of goes through here. But not only in relation with her brother. So as I said, there are a lot of other characters who kind of are responsible for her arc, for the growth of her character.
Thank you so much, Richa ma'am, for showing that map first of all. Because if you have illustrated by your own creativity, that is a
Right.
huge thing, and
Yeah.
that
Thank
certainly
you.
adds up to the story.
Thank you. Thank
And
you. Thank you so much.
so, thank you, Mona ma'am and Richa ma'am, for this very insightful conversation and for your time this evening. So, tell me a story. Calls for suggestions on the story prompt, Devi. We hope to hear from you. Till then, stay well, stay happy, stay together. Good night.
Thank you.